would like to stay and ask questions and continue discussing or debating, we can continue that. But we'll start, you'll be the first to know, I'm actually in the middle of planning a new series that I'm trying to really take advantage of Zoom, because some people are in Yiddish what we call ausgezoomt, which means they're zoomed out. So we have to come up with exciting ways of engaging and inspiring Jewish people. So one of the, a newer thing that I'm planning, and it's a pretty big project because I'm working with different time zones, is interviewing very interesting different Jewish communities across the world. So I have a rabbi in Nigeria who does incredible work, really, of tikkun olam, with not only Jews, with Muslims and people living in Nigeria. He has an incredible story. He's a shochet. He has a mikveh there. So interviewing and learning about the experience of, and the styles of different communities. So ideas that, and rabbis I'm in touch with is the Jewish community in Nigeria, a Jewish community in Sumy, Ukraine, which is a pretty heated area just in terms of borders and everything. One of the oldest Jewish communities or Jewish temples that we have is in Rome, Italy. So I'm finding different communities and interacting with the rabbis there and trying to learn about their communities and introduce it to our community to learn and be inspired. So hopefully that'll start this coming Sunday, hashing out some details, but I'm waiting on some time zones to get responses, but hopefully it'll start Sunday and it'll be around 10:30 or 10 o'clock, depending on certain time zones. But that should be starting this Sunday, and I'm really looking forward to it. And God willing, tomorrow or the day after, I'll send out an email with more information. Okay, I got a nice juice over here, so I'm going to start with a blessing. If you have water, or if you started the evening early and you have some wine, you're welcome to make a hagafen, but I'm just going to make a shahako blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh bidvaro.
Amen.
Okay, so there was two guys walking on the street. One says to the other, Rappaport, you look like a different person. You changed everything. You lost weight. You got a facelift. You got a hair transplant. I wouldn't have even recognized you. Another guy says, I'm not Rappaport. And the guy says, you changed your name also? So there's different styles and perspectives. And if a person is so convinced in one way, it's going to be hard pressed to try to change his style, his bias.
Even with a dad joke like that?
So during a private audience with the Rebbe, there was a man by the name of Charles Roth. And Charles Roth was the executive director of the National Jewish Post for almost 30 years. And he was extolling his periodical. And he said, our publication is independent and completely objective. And the Rebbe responded, independent, perhaps, but objective, in the Rebbe's words, there is no such thing. It is humanly impossible to be completely objective. Every person has a bias of some kind. After the class, God willing, I'll follow up with an email of sources. Some of them will be video encounters of people relating these stories where you could hear them related directly, or sources where these are from. But that's a pretty heavy statement. Do you agree that everyone has a bias? Do you think of yourself as biased in any way or in every way? Is bias a negative thing? When you hear someone say, oh, you're biased, so therefore you can't have an input, is it negative or is it neutral? If bias is largely negative, is there ever a situation or a scenario where it's a good thing, or at least it's okay to be biased? For example, should a parent be biased when it comes to their child? And if yes, is that good or is it bad? Is it ideal for a parent to be completely objective toward their child? Yeah. Okay. 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 So tell Yossi to do another one. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so tell mommy. Sorry about that. So
Sorry.
it's the blessings. I'm blessed to have the cute kids. So these are just questions to ponder as we begin our class, as we begin our course. But what we understand from the Rebbe's words to this executive director, Charles Roth, is that while one can perhaps be independent, which means you're unbeholden to any particular organization or ideology, but you can't live without bias. It's a mix of nature, nurture, free will. We each have a certain lens that frames and forms how we see ourselves, how we see others, and how we see the world around us. It's simply not possible to erase any traces of our past, personality, and deeply held beliefs that we gain from our observations of things, expressions, or actions. No matter how hard we try, those are a part of us. Our past experience, our personalities. So this frame that we adopt, whether it's conscious or unconsciously, it impacts the way we perceive reality. So it's a very interesting discussion to have, is what is our bias? Because what I'm trying to get to is that we have a bias. So if our bias is inevitable, and it's there to color the way we interpret and experience the world, it follows that what we should be doing, especially at a time like we are in now, and our primary focus should be to assess and reset, if needed, our biases. So what I want to begin the class with is, what are my biases? A question, what is your bias? What is my bias? How can they be adjusted, or if need to be changed, to better serve myself, others within my family, others within a community, and in the broader world? So that's what we're going to be trying to relate to, having this bias that we have inevitably, but reframing it with a positive mindset, a positive bias. A lot of what, I brought the book here, a lot of what I will be sharing is on a book that I personally recommend. Some of you even have it in your home. It's called Positivity Bias. It was written by a Chabad rabbi in London. He's a friend of ours. His name is Rabbi Mendel Kalmanson. But he just culled it from stories of the Rebbe. Some of you have it from me, or you could buy it through us. You could buy it also on Amazon. It's all stories of the Rebbe. And what we'll be doing is trying to reframe, and hopefully with some discussion as well, and sharing some stories of the Rebbe, reframing our bias to be positive, and hopefully learning from each other of gaining that positivity bias. So the reason why we're going to be going through some stories, I find them to be inspiring stories. But we're going to be looking at the way the Rebbe had a positivity bias, or a positive, I don't know if positivity bias would be a proper word, but a positive bias. The way, using the lens, the way the Rebbe viewed the world and the way the Rebbe viewed others, it was just simply and purely positively biased. It was fundamentally positive. So we're going to point out these stories, and seeing the Rebbe's lens with a positive perspective, you'll see from these stories, it's just impossible to miss the Rebbe's bias in such a positive way. And we'll share soon, the Rebbe wasn't naive. The Rebbe has been through World War I and World War II, and we'll go through some of those points. But there are countless documented stories, letters, anecdotes, and lessons we can learn and cull from the Rebbe's life and behavior that demonstrates this personality, this bias that the Rebbe had, that literally illuminates every corner and every nuance of his speech. And we're going to try to work on that as well. It's not only in our mind, it's also in our speech, in our action, in our reactions, and literally every interaction with the power of having a positive bias. So here are just a few examples of taking this positive bias to better understand how we should have a perspective. Some of you tuned in a couple of weeks ago. This is one of my favorite stories. I only learned about it. I don't know when it became available and more public, but it was on a video that we showed on a joint a broadcast together with other communities across the North Bay, across the Bay Area, about Shirley Chisholm, who at the time in the 60s, she was elected to represent in 1968, I think, to represent the New York's 12th congressional district, which included her own neighborhood of Crown Heights. Now, in Crown Heights, that's a section of Brooklyn where it's the Chabad headquarters. Some of you have been together with me to Crown Heights to visit the Chabad headquarters. And she made headlines as the first African-American woman elected to Congress in the 60s. But she soon found out her congressional career was stunted or kind of stumbled by a very race-related, it was racist. Basically, a lot of the Southern Congress people put political pressure that the House leadership assigned Shirley Chisholm, who was a very urban, representing a very urban area, to the Agricultural Committee, a committee focused on the needs of rural America, a place where it would be assumed that she could have very little, if any, influence. And at the time, the title of this story that I'll send to you after is, "Does a Tree Grow in Brooklyn?" which is the front page of the New York Times when she was assigned as this agricultural committee. That was the front page of the New York Times, because it was a laughing matter. It was an embarrassment that she would have no chance of making good on her legislative agenda, what she wanted to get to affect anything that she wanted to affect in Congress. She was committed to taking issue with the needs of the inner city in New York, but her committee, being in agriculture, didn't have the power to do so. She was angry and depressed. And she gets a call one evening from the Rebbe's aides, the Rebbe's secretary, saying, "The Rebbe wants to see you." Now, she knew the Rebbe because she lived in Crown Heights. And when they met, I think the week after, the Rebbe told her, "I know you're very upset." And she says, "Of course, I'm deeply insulted." And she asked the Rebbe, "What should I do?" So the Rebbe's response was, "What a blessing you were given." And this stunned the Congresswoman. The Rebbe said, "This country is in such a surplus of food, and yet there are still so many hungry people. You can use this gift that God gave you, which is your current position, to feed hungry people. Find a creative way to do it." And tasked with this charge, she showed up in DC. On her first day, she met then a young Senator Bob Dole on her first day in Washington. And he was looking for help for Midwestern farmers who were losing money in their crops in the late 60s. And the way Bob Dole explained it is, Americans have started importing food, produce, and as a result of those imports, farmers are losing an enormous amount of money and business. They have a surplus of food that are left unsold. What do we do with this? And Shirley Chisholm said, aha, the Rebbe's advice. And they got to work, and within the next few years, they expanded the National Food Stamp Program, which allowed poor Americans to buy food on a subsidized rate, specifically from Midwestern farmers. And then it expanded in the 70s. I think it was ruled on by the Agricultural and Consumer Department or something, protection, that mandated the food stamps be made available to everyone and all jurisdictions across the United States. And they went on to co-create what's now known as WIC, which stands for Women, Infants, and I think Children that are in need and get subsidized food during their childhood and for pregnant or nursing women. And that benefits millions and millions of Americans. So during her retirement party, and someone who was there relates this story, and I'll send you the video in the follow-up, and some of you watched it on our joint video a few weeks ago. She shared, Shirley Chisholm, when she was retiring, she shared this moving story. And she says, and just to quote, I owe all of this to a rabbi who was an optimist, who taught me that what you may think is a challenge is actually a gift from God. So if poor babies have milk and poor children have food today, it's because there was a rabbi in Crown Heights that had a vision. What a powerful story. Later in the 70s, another story, to get even a perspective of even our speech and the perspective the Rebbe had that really we need to work on changing, is the Rebbe in the late 70s suffered a very severe, actually a double heart attack. It was the night of Shmini Atzeret, which is really one of the most joyous nights when we dance Hakafot. And there was a large crowd gathered in 770 in Crown Heights to be with the Rebbe. And the Rebbe suffered late at night a very, very serious and a double heart attack. 2 days later, the Rebbe wanted, on the day after the night of Simchas Torah, when electronics are used again, the Rebbe wanted to give his regular speech, his regular Torah talk that usually he would deliver on Simchas Torah. But now, because he was confined to his room and being monitored and with different things that he had to be careful with, he wanted to do it at least over a microphone as a hookup for people to be able to hear, both in Crown Heights, but across the world. So he's been doing this for the past 28 years, and the doctors weren't comfortable with him using his energy to speak. So they told the Rebbe that if you don't take care of your health, there's a 25% chance that you will have a relapse. And then they asked the Rebbe, did you hear what we said? And the Rebbe responded like this, yes, with a smile. You said that even if I don't take care of my health, which I assure you that I will, there is still a 75% chance that there won't be a relapse. It's a slight change, either a 25% chance of a relapse or a 75% chance that there won't be a relapse. Same numbers, but different perspective. So even just the paraphrasing of life might seem radical to some, or may seem insignificant, but it is in fact a necessary perspective for all of us to engage in. It may seem small, like one of the things in another book that we have of the Rebbe, it's simply called Rebbe. It was a New York Times bestseller. One of the most esteemed Jewish authors, he's a conservative rabbi by the name of Rabbi Joseph Telushkin. He wrote many of the very known Jewish books like Jewish Humor, Jewish Literacy, and many others. He wrote a book on the Rebbe. He spent 5 years researching the Rebbe's life, and he published a book in honor of the Rebbe's 20th yahrzeit. And it's a really well done biography. In fact, he writes in his introduction that when he would come home, usually when he was researching other books, he would come home stressed. So much to do, so little information that he was able to get through an interview. But when he would come home, his wife told him, and he wrote this in his introduction, when he come home at the end of the day, while researching for this book of the Rebbe, he came home elated. He came home inspired because just hearing the stories lifted him up. One of the things he writes about in this book is that even such a simple thing as saying a deadline, the Rebbe wouldn't use that term. Instead of saying a deadline, which has to do with dead, the Rebbe would use a due date. When is it due by? What's the due date? Because it has something to do with life. Such a simple thing. But if we apply some of the Rebbe's optimism to our own lives, problems would be revealed as potentials for growth. Enemies would be understood as teachers. And setbacks would be seen for what they really are, springboards to get us to the next level. So on this idea, another small story, but again, it brings home a certain point. There was once a traveling business person who, in the course of his travels, encountered something that upset him, that he had to write to the Rebbe. He was in a far-flung community where he was davening in a shul, and it disturbed him greatly because in the shul, in the synagogue that he was praying in, there was a man there who, instead of praying with a prayer book, with a siddur, which is what most people would do in a synagogue during services, he was reading a newspaper. And the guy felt it was a chutzpah. So he wrote to the Rebbe, how could this be in a shul? This is inappropriate. I want to complain to the board. How do I proceed? So the Rebbe responded to this man that everyone, of course, reacts to an experience in a way that is closest to them, in a way that resonates with them. So for my part, the Rebbe says, I'm going to make the following observation. And these are the words, I'm going to quote the Rebbe in this letter, these are the words the Rebbe says. I see in this situation the degree of Jewish attachment that one can find in every single Jew. Here is a person who has wandered off to a remote part of the world and has become so far removed, not only geographically, but also mentally, as to have no concept of what prayer is or what a house of God is, yet one finds in him a Jewish spark, a divine soul, which is truly a part of God. And this divine soul is seeking expression. And that's the end of the Rebbe's quote. But what the Rebbe was saying is that in this particular Jew, he's at least enabling others to be able to pray. He wanted to be counted for a minyan, to help others who needed him for a minyan. So he said, you know what, I want to read a newspaper, but let me help them as well. So he identified with them and said, I want to be a part of this. And he goes out of his way to help them and at the same time be counted with them. So it's a beautiful, it's like the Rebbe's insight of the same person reading a newspaper in a synagogue, but with a whole new perspective. So what we're going to try to come away with this evening is reframing, reshaping our bias, because we have a bias, and it's not a bad thing, but we just need to reshape it to have a positive bias, to reframe the way we see encounters and the way we word things and the way we process things, to take from the congresswoman to the doctor about the heart attack, reframing everything and looking at challenges as springboards. So I hope that part is clear. Any questions before we continue? Okay, so there's a human phenomenon that scientists have coined as a negativity bias. It's our ingrained mindset to, when we have a negative bias, it allows us that an experience of a more negative nature, it will have a greater effect on our psychological state. And we're kind of ingrained that way. That a negative behavior will affect us more than a neutral or a positive one. I mean, at the end of the day, the fact is that when someone comes home and they had 9 positive encounters that day and 1 negative, what do they come home telling their spouse about first? The negative one. It just stands out in their mind more than the positive ones. And I didn't do this research, but BBC did it for me, that neuroscientists, they say that our brains develop like specialized circuits that register negative experiences immediately in our emotional memory so that we can learn from them and it stands out stronger. On the other hand, the more positive experience, it flows more, which means we experience, we enjoy it, and we continue on. It's almost like a sieve. It passes through. So our brain space is used much more to scan and to restore and process negative experiences more than positive ones. So out of necessity, because it's there to protect us, to learn from these negative experiences, we've become masters at fixating on negative. That's what's news. That's what people process. So the problem is, of course, and we're seeing now very strongly, and I thank God, and many people in the class this evening communicate with a lot of people as well, and we see that there's a side effect that comes. We're always on high alert for potential dangers. What happens is the positive that's going on in the world seems to get overlooked. It gets less attention. For example, here's a good one, and I see this all the time, is when we get a compliment, a beautiful compliment. We feel nice for a moment, but then our brain shifts right back to a more defensive mode. And within half an hour, we forget those compliments, those positive feelings, and we don't linger on them too long. If we get an insult, we could linger on that for a much, much longer time, like a lot longer. I'm talking about like 50 years longer. I could go on and on with jokes about that, but I'll be here all night. So establishing
Can I ask a question?
yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think that the way that I see it and the way that see it through other classes that I've taken is that unconscious bias, the bias that we're taught as children that we're not aware of, and then also the perspective that we gain through experience, those are survival things. They're necessary. We need them.
Sure.
But they're also our animal self as opposed to our spiritual self or our higher self, and that the work that we can do through Judaism and through being humans on the planet and being aware of our unconscious bias is that we could transcend that into a place where we're using that experience to benefit all as opposed to keeping us separate from all.
Absolutely. And what's more natural than, first of all, Barbara, I didn't know, but I'm seeing on your name, your Jewish name is Bina. Bina is the analysis part of our cognitive faculties. After the wisdom comes the Bina, which is a foundational part of Tanya, which is a book of Chabad Hasidism. So that's a beautiful comment, and that really is exactly the point. If you're saying it in terms of animal, the animal soul, which is more the drive of self-preservation, by nature we're given that at birth.
It's survival. It's a good thing. We die otherwise.
Sure. It's the way we're like it's there. So in terms of the negativity bias, it's there to protect us, to make sure we learn from this experience, and we put up a framework, we put up a fence, whatever it needs. But what we need to work on also, and it's more of a workout, and that's why a lot of people, it's harder for them to do, is to also develop something that we have ingrained as well, which is our godly soul, and to develop more of a positive bias. Now, learning from these stories, it will see that it's just a matter of perspective, and it's a little bit every day. Maybe it's changing our language. Maybe it's changing a certain perspective. I didn't have time before the class. I read a lot of stories, and I try now. We have a little more time to be reading books. There's a book called One by One, also Encounters of the Rebbe. And someone, before he was going out to open up a community, he asked the Rebbe, like, what's the best advice you could give me? Only rabbi moving to a new town, not a new town, but a town that doesn't have anything yet Jewish established. The Rebbe says, whoever you meet, smile to. Doesn't seem like the most earth-shattering tikkun olam style advice, but just give a smile to everyone. You have no idea how it could affect them. And just on a personal level, I didn't know the story until a couple months ago, but when I moved to town here in Novato in 2012, I got interviewed together with Adina. We got interviewed by local newspapers. It was big news for Novato because there's not that much news that happens around here. So new rabbi moves to town, first rabbi ever in Novato's history. Yarmulke, rabbi toots his horn around town, I think was one of the titles, because I had my shofar that we were blowing on Rosh Hashanah. So it said in the article, that I'm a hockey rabbi. And if anyone's on Facebook, I recently posted a picture of me as a hockey player as a kid, which I would have made a lot more money as a salary than a Chabad rabbi, but definitely
Thank you for sacrificing for us.
Yes, a big sacrifice.
Yeah.
But I also I sacrificed my nose. I broke my nose playing hockey a couple times. But it also said in there that I'm always smiling. So I just remember literally one of my first week here. The first week we moved to town, we buy out half of Costco. That's usually what a Chabad rabbi does. We want to do a big event. We don't have any chairs yet, so we buy Costco chairs. I still have most of them. So I'm in Costco trying to figure out in my minivan, how am I fitting 50 chairs in there? And I didn't know anyone in town yet to borrow pickup trucks and friends and schleppers and whatever. So I'm there sweating in the parking lot of Costco. And there's a woman, I'm still in touch with her. She's a really kind woman. She's with her cart and I'm in the back of my minivan. And she like walks by me staring at me. And she walks by me. She rolls her cart back to look again at me. And then she continues going. And then she pulls up in her car and she says, I was thinking that you're the new rabbi I read about in the papers, but it can't be you because in the paper, it says that this rabbi is always smiling. And I guarantee you in that Costco parking lot, I wasn't smiling. I was sweating and schlepping. But it reminded me that everywhere you go, it's an opportunity for an incredible encounter and experience. So thank God that one worked out. But it was just an interesting Rebbe advice that he gave to this rabbi before moving out, is smile to everyone, whether you're in the gym or at a hotel clerk or going off an airplane and the attendant says, have a great day, or just going on a jog or a bike ride and someone passes you. It's just a smile or a good morning, but it could really make an incredible difference. So another research is 11 to 15, sorry, let me rephrase it. People that live with a positive, optimistic lens live 11 to 15% longer than their pessimistic peers. Just an interesting research. I can send you that one as well. So the Rebbe was, as Barbara, as you were saying, the Rebbe was well aware of natural tendency of human consciousness, that we naturally dwell on the negative. Nevertheless, he consistently insisted that we can change our experience, any encounter, any experience of life for the better by making conscious and concerted efforts to focus and dwell on the positive. So there was an individual who complained to the Rebbe about his lot in life, about circumstances that he was going through, and he received a penetrating response, like a poignant response from the Rebbe. The Rebbe says, in our world, everything we experience, everything is a mixture of good and bad. Human beings must choose which aspects they will emphasize, contemplate, and pursue. The Rebbe continues how instructive it is that our sages say that even Adam, the first person that was actually crafted by God himself, Adam, our sages say, was an ingrate. Even before he was banished from the Garden of Eden, from Gan Eden, he was living in paradise, and he had what to complain about. He complained about his circumstances. On the other hand, the Rebbe continues, there were men and women who thanked and blessed their Creator, and there's stories, goosebump-worthy stories, that thanked their Creator and recited morning blessings of thanks while living through hell on earth. That's not the Rebbe's words, but living through the most horrifying times in concentration camps. Ultimately, everyone's experience will be somewhere between these two extremes, between Adam in paradise and between a German concentration camp, God forbid. So the Rebbe concludes, my point is not to admonish, it's simply to underscore the reality that the type of lives that we live, whether full of satisfaction and meaning or the opposite, depends in large part on our willpower, which dictates whether we will focus on the positive or if we will be focusing on the negative. And what this tells us is our perspective on everything that's going on. It's so powerful. They either can lead us to find fault living in Gan Eden, to find fault living in paradise, or to be able to express gratitude even in a state of suffering. Now, there was a chassid by the name of Reb Beryl Yunik, and he was an aide of the Rebbe. He was actually very helpful in the Rebbe's home and with the Rebbitzin, the Rebbe's wife. And he once alluded, he said these words, that his focus on seeing things in a positive light, it comes because of his harrowing and frightful, dangerous past. The Rebbe said, I worked on myself to always look at things in a positive light. Listen to this. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to survive. It's a simple statement, but that's deceptive. It encapsulates such a basic tenet of truth, such a foundation, that living a life of a positivity is a matter of choice. It's not circumstance. It derives from perspective, not personality. Just to put that in context, the Rebbe, as I mentioned earlier, the Rebbe was born in 1902. He lived through waves of pogroms in the early 1900s in the Ukraine. He lived through the killing fields of World War I, a typhus epidemic that was in his community, that his family had, that he had, a refugee crisis, the persecution and the forced exile of his father and the torture, who he never saw again, the Bolshevik Revolution, the rise of communism, World War II, his own grandmother and his own brother and many of his family members being murdered in horrible fashions, and having a life of childlessness. And add to the fact that besides for the Rebbe's own personal life, the Rebbe received, I don't know how many letters. What we know is that the Rebbe received the second to most mail in the whole United States. There's videos of the mail carrier pulling up in front of 770 and literally just spending 20 minutes just bringing in the mail, milk crates or whatever he brings it in with of mail. People looking for love, acceptance, comfort, help, and simply a reason to live. So it reinforces this idea that the Rebbe's powerful comment to Rabbi Yunik, to this chassid, that I worked on myself to always see things in a positive light, to always see things positively. It reminds us that or it highlights for us that we all need to develop and work on creating our own positive worldview or positivity bias. And it comes, this is the hard word, it comes through avodah. It's not maybe so natural. It comes through work. It comes through a workout. Just like you do a workout in order to get fit. You have to do a workout in order to have a fit mind, to have a healthy perspective. It's dedication, it's inner work. So I find that to be so powerful. I just jotted down one or two more stories I would love to share with you. Because now we're going through very turbulent times. If anyone will even just watch the news or read, I don't know if you watch or read, but the news today, it's scary again. There's a whole bunch of reversal here in not only Marin and California. So how do we handle situations that disrupt, let's just talk a little more general, situations that disrupt our schedule? How do you deal with obstacles on our path? God forbid if there's sudden illness. Events, emergencies that cause you to put your life on hold. What happens when plans just don't go your way? Now, we could rate on a scale from 1 to 10 if we were planning this beautiful picnic and the picnic comes with the matching table, the matching picnic, a checkered red picnic cloth, together with the matching plates and cups, and you even pack corned beef on rye sandwiches, and it even had a pickle in there. It's like perfect. And you get there and you're unloading, you have the juice and you have the sodas, everyone, whatever they wanted, Diet Coke and Dr. Pepper. But we forgot the mayonnaise. And you could spend your whole time complaining about the mayonnaise and coming home and saying, what type of experience was that without putting mayonnaise in there? So we could rate on a scale from 1 to 10, what was the experience like going and having that picnic? So that's a petty example, of course. We're talking about a little more serious, but many of us normally become disoriented when things don't go our way, when life takes its unexpected turns. We know where we were going, and anything that veers off that path is met with resistance, rejection. We know we're supposed to be in control, and we know best. So it throws everything upside down. But what if we look at it in a different light? What if we weren't necessarily in charge all the time? What if there's more going on in our lives and in the world around us than we are aware of? So what one of the points I want to bring out is what we need to try to cultivate is to appreciate the role, what's in Hebrew called hashgacha pratit, which means in English divine orchestration, how God divine orchestrates things around us. And then we could discover hidden meaning and opportunity within any situation which we find ourselves in. So to explain that, what does it mean, any situation that we find ourselves in? They say the joke of the very well-known, a wealthy person in the community, that he owned this beautiful palace of a mansion, and he invited as a pool party his buddies, neighbors, and he invited the local schlemazel. His name was Max, and he held the party in his backyard. It was around the pool. And at the height of the party, everyone's having a great time. The host said that in this pool, I have a 10-foot man-eating gator. I have an alligator. It would eat up anyone. Anyone who's ready to jump in, I'll give $1 million to. Everyone's laughing. Before even he finishes that sentence, Max is in the water already. And he's fighting. He's putting everything he can in, and he's going under the water and on top of the water. Everyone's looking and staring in disbelief as Max is winning the fight, and he tackled the gator. And he comes out victorious. People couldn't believe it. They were cheering for him, shocked. The wealthy owner, He says, Max, a word's a word. I owe you $1 million. Max says, no, I don't need it. Come on, Max, at least take $500,000. No, no, thank you. $250,000? No. Max, what is it that you want? So Max says, I want to know the name of the guy who pushed me into the water. So you could be, nothing that happens is by chance. Everything is hashgacha pratis. So that's a pretty extreme example. I wish it on no one to be in a pool with a gator. But there's a famous speaker, a Chabad Rebbitzin. Her name is Miriam Swerdlove. Some of you may have heard of her, may have went to some of her seminars. She's active in the Sheikh Chabad. The women of Chabad, they do retreats in Palm Springs and Cleveland and different areas, different cities, and in Israel, of course. So in the late 60s, 1967, this, at the time, young woman, Miriam Swerdlove, was part of a Chabad woman retreat, which took place in the winter of 1967 in Detroit. And after the inspiring event, they were waiting to board their flight home, and they found out, together, Miriam with 20 other women, that the flight was canceled due to a snowstorm, and they were stuck there in the airport. So the group rushed to a payphone and called the Chabad headquarters, called New York, to ask the Rebbe what to do. Should we wait for the next flight? Should we go back to and stay in a hotel? So the leader of the group, her name was Mrs. Popek, and she was speaking to the Rebbe's secretary on the payphone in the airport, and she told him that we're stuck in the Detroit airport. So the secretary put her on hold for a minute, went to tell the Rebbe, and came back to the line and saying these words. The Rebbe doesn't understand the word stuck. So Mrs. Popek proceeded to explain stuck, what it means, like the definition of stuck. The secretary replied, no, you don't understand. The Rebbe knows what stuck means. The Rebbe is telling you that a Jew is never stuck. Upon learning the Rebbe's response, these 20-some women in the Detroit airport got to work. They rose to the occasion. And they started going through the airport and began handing out Shabbat candles to the Jewish women they met. So Mrs. Swerdlove concludes the story that till today there are women that are lighting Shabbat candles all over the United States as a result of that winter of 1967. From us being stuck in Detroit. Because as far as the Rebbe was concerned, there's no such thing as being stuck. 6 months ago, right here at a Harvest Market, we were, I think, low on grape juice, and Harvest Market, which is a store right up the street from us on San Marin in Novato, they sell grape juice. So usually I don't shop at Harvest Market because it's a smaller chain, it's a smaller store, it's a little bit overpriced, and we have Trader Joe's right next to Chabad. But we were out of grape juice, and I went to the store to get grape juice. And as I was checking out, I'm rarely in that store, and a woman says, you must be buying for Shabbos, for Kiddush. This was Friday afternoon. And I didn't even pay attention. I was like, of course, yes. And she's Jewish from New York, and we had a lovely conversation. And I emailed her before the holiday of Pesach. Usually we have a big Seder. This year we didn't. But I wanted to make sure everyone has what they need for the Seder. So I emailed her, and she didn't have anything for the Seder. And within a day, she came and picked up all her food and kugel and Seder plate items, because I forgot grape juice and I needed grape juice, and it came out to such a mitzvah. And Adasa was just there. My daughter just went there to buy something last week and gave her Shabbos candles. It's all from what seemed like, oh, we need something from the store. These are, every moment of our life is orchestrated by God. So we all know that message, that everything is orchestrated by God. But then it's also realizing that it's not just a statement, it's every moment of our life. We have to have that perspective. And it's avodah. It takes a little bit of work. So I'll just pause to see. I'm sorry, I didn't have the chat box open on my screen. Oh, is it called SNAP? I'm sorry. Oh, SNAP is, what does that stand for? SNAP is, Adrian, I'm assuming that's food stamps? I don't know what it stands for, but WIC, and I'm assuming SNAP is part of that program.
No, SNAP is not part of food stamps. They're separate.
Do you know what it stands for?
Yeah, no, SNAP, I'm sorry. SNAP is food stamps, but WIC is separate.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so I'm not sure if they were together, created around the same time, or it definitely was expanded by Shirley Chisholm. Thank you.
Same type program.
Yeah, so there's a Yiddish expression that actually, Tessa, you helped me with. I always thought nishta hin, nishta her means neither here nor there, which is the way it's explained, the way it means. But literally, nishta hin, nishta her, correct me if I'm wrong, Tessa, it means neither a hen nor a...
Like a rabbit, you know.
Or a hare, right? Okay, neither a hen nor a rabbit, neither of the two. So while we're saying that we have to have the perspective of seeing everything in life as an opportunity and as a part of hashgacha pratis, divine orchestration, but many of us feel disoriented, not only in a matter of perspective, but because we don't know when this is coming to an end. It's already, I think, on day 119. It's when you have a known time, it's from here till there, you could make plans. But when it's disrupted, but you can't even make a proper plan anymore, and you're in a state of transition out of your normal routine and your normal environment, and all that has been completely upended, and many of our plans have been suspended for the time being. So it comes with a different set of challenges as well, a more magnified set of challenges. And since we don't know how long it's going to be, it's unsettling. So the following story is also a really interesting one. There was a young, what we call in Yiddish, a yeshiva bacher, who was a rabbinical student who was from Melbourne, Australia, but he got engaged and he married a Jewish girl from Worcester, Massachusetts. And with the Rebbe's blessing, he joined his wife's family and assumed the role of youth director in the Jewish community in Massachusetts. And after a few years, a position opened up in Australia that he really wanted, and he was invited to relocate to Melbourne and to be a Chabad rabbi in Melbourne. He asked and received the Rebbe's blessing that he could make the move to Melbourne. So once he began preparing for his move to Australia, which was on, it still is on the other side of the world, but then it definitely seemed a lot farther. This was in the 70s. He began to feel as if his life in the United States, he was just treading water. He was just making do until he gets to his final destination. He already finished off his main activities, but he didn't yet move to Australia. So he was feeling not fully in Australia yet, but not really any more part of the community back home in the United States. So he wasn't yet gone, but his frame of mind wasn't there, wasn't present. So in a private audience with the Rebbe, in a personal audience, he confided with the Rebbe the state of mind, this feeling that he had. So actually, in the Torah portion we're reading now, we're learning about the Jewish people's trek and journey of the 40 years. It summarizes all the journeys of the 40 years of the Jewish people's wander in the desert. So the Rebbe tells them that there was times during this trek and wander in the desert that Jews were camped in one place for a year or for a few years. Sometimes they were camped in the same place for a night. They would arrive in the evening and leave in the morning. They didn't know when they're coming and when they're departing. It happened through what's in Hebrew known as the Ananei HaKavod, the clouds of glory, which were leading the Jewish people and protecting them in the wilderness. But wherever they were, they would totally unpack. And when I say totally unpack, they had the whole tabernacle, the Mishkan, the sanctuary, that was an enormous project to build, that they would transport with them from place to place. It came in wagons, and they would have to carry certain parts of it, the ark and the mizbeach, the altar and the menorah and all the beams. We're talking about hundreds of silver foundational sockets to build the sanctuary upon. And yet, wherever they were, no matter how transitional it felt, they always fully erected, they fully set up the entire Mishkan, even if it was for a week or a day. So the Rebbe told him that they went through this tremendous trouble of setting up the Mishkan, the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, and the sanctuary, each and every time. And it was a huge structure that they had to put together. It was thousands of Levium, of Levites, that were having to work together to build this. So it was an entire feat. Just the idea of working together was hard. And so many Jewish people working together is even harder. And they would have to assemble it and then disassemble it when it was time to leave. Every encampment, they rebuilt it, even for a day. So the Talmud actually learns many laws from here, including the principle that if you find yourself in a place, even if it's just for one day, you are there permanently. While you are there, you're not just there to go somewhere else. You're going through that place because there's a permanency of you being there. So the Rebbe concluded, this teaches that each and every one of us have our stations in life. And it is significant. Each station is significant. It's not only I'm in one stage of my life just to get to the next stage, but I'm not really going to enhance and establish myself here. It's almost like, imagine being in a hotel room for a night and giving cookies to your next door neighbor in the hotel to be nice. You do that when you move into a new community, when you're establishing relationships with neighbors. But you don't do that to neighbors in a hotel room. I'm just there for the night. But over here, the Rebbe was saying, okay, I don't know about the hotels, but the Rebbe, I'm just going to finish the quote here from the story. A person, this is the Rebbe's quote, a person may find himself in a certain place or situation for a very brief period. And it may seem to him that he is merely transitional, he's merely on the way to another place. Yet there is always something in that place or situation that needs to be sanctified. Something that can serve as a tent of meeting between heaven and earth. And to conclude the quote of the Rebbe, one should never live their life, was telling Rabbi Glick, this young rabbi, one should never live their life as though they are standing with a packed suitcase ready to go. Wherever you are, you have to have a permanency of that place, just like the Jews of the desert, wherever they were, even if it was just for a night or a week, they were fully there, realizing that there's a purpose of why they were there. So I find this to be, we'll conclude with this story, I find this to be a very powerful story. I know we have some people also tuned in from the East Coast. I find this to be a very powerful story for the beautiful idea that even if what seems to be like a transitional, temporary time is in fact something permanent that is calling me there. And we have to make the most of our unique opportunities that we are capable of. And it's a paradigm shift that the Rebbe gives us that I think can have potentially very significant ramifications. Any thoughts on this story in particular before we wrap up the class and get some final thoughts? The story of Rabbi Glick, I found this to be, I know when Nadine and I were living in New York, we felt transitional. We felt we're here only until we find the right opportunity to start our own community. That was our destination. We never really looked at New York as a destination for the first month until we realized, no, if we're here, we're fully established here. We're going to try to find a place, but we're here fully. And it was a very weird time because we weren't sure, even just from a furniture perspective, are we going to invest in nice furniture? Or are we going to be just getting secondhand and bare minimum because we're trying to get out? So we had to find that equal balance. But in matter of perspective, we made lifelong friendships and taught, and I still mentor certain students that we came in touch with. And it was a really special time that I would never want to give away. I learned and I grew so much in that year and a half or two that Dina and I were in New York, but it's a pretty cool perspective. We became very close to some of our neighbors. One was our Shabbos guy, a great guy. His name was neighbor Paul. And when I remember when he passed away, I helped his wife. He wasn't a Jewish guy, but he was just a wonderful guy, and we had that relationship with his wife after he passed, and it was very meaningful. But it was a transitional time, so I find that to be a nice perspective. Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
There's a book called Wherever You Go, There You Are. It reminded me of that.
Nice. Okay, thank you, Adrian.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think
Go ahead.
learn to
Go ahead, Isabel. Isabel, you're there?
yes, I think you have to learn to, you have to think about what does that mean? What am I going to do? Am I going to take this, if you're there for a night, are you going to take it as an opportunity for a retreat? Or are you going to say, I'm going to make a connection
Beautiful.
with somebody? But I think you have to be aware of it.
Amazing. So I think that Isabel is so right, but I would even say it's not only when you arrive there to think about that perspective. It's almost like it has to become as a nature, a second nature. That wherever I am, I'm going to be present. I'm going to be fully there. So then, no matter what arises, you're present. When things go out of whack, you're right. It is a mindset, but I think it's a constant mindset that we always have to be working on to feel and to think. Let me see, Barbara Schwartz. I would love your perspective also, and I'm just going on through videos over here one at a time. But yeah, Margie, I would love to hear you also. Barbara, do you have any perspective or thoughts on this?
Well, having lived in this house for 36 years, I've had lots of time to feel present.
Yeah.
But there was a time in my life that I never stayed longer than a year, and this went on for almost 2 decades. And it's when you have nothing else to pick and choose, you take what you have.
Wow. And when you look back at those 1-year stints in different places, did you build any relationships? Did you have any opportunities of growth?
Definitely inner growth, definitely personal growth. Interestingly enough, the people that I related to at that time are no longer present in my life, other than my children. That doesn't mean that the relationships lacked in any way, not at the time.
Right.
But thinking about it, I can't picture anybody, because there's nobody from that time that I've seen in the last decade.
Wow. Actually, I remember, Barbara, when we moved here, in maybe it was that article that I referenced before, or maybe a different newspaper, I don't remember. I remember there was a comment, because in it, the interviewer, the editor, he interviewed me. So he asked me about my life. I was born in Vancouver. I grew up in Montreal. I went to yeshiva in LA. I got ordained and I went teaching in Miami, and then I got married and moved to New York. So he went through my whole life. I don't mind. I like talking about my life. But one of the comments was so mean. One of the comments is like, you were never able to settle anywhere. No one in every city you were in. And I was a 25-year-old. And like when you're in yeshiva in college, you go to different places and you have different opportunities. I found it to be a very immature comment. But actually, I remember thinking, I was like, I'm so lucky that I got to be in so many different places and learn from so many different people and have so many teachers and relationships that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So like it was almost a perspective. Like it could have affected me, but really I felt like I felt it was their loss for not having a good perspective. But it was such a beautiful thing. I was like, you should want to get to know me better because I have experiences of so many places. And by the way, that was the Rebbe's perspective on everything. Like a lot of people look at older people that they're in the workforce. Many people in our community, they were, I don't know what the word is, they were paid to retire early because their employers wanted a younger style or younger energy. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think you get what I mean. And the Rebbe almost like valued the elder, the experience that they have so much input, they have so much expertise, and it's really a matter of perspective. And I think that like we could always, it's like a shift of perspective. The same story, just with a perspective, could really change everything. I know, Margie, I'm sorry, I would love to hear what you have to share.
Well, some of the thoughts that came up for me, I can't see, were that along what you were talking about was that, you know, as I pass through my day or on trips, I tend to give things less important because I'm passing through, passing on,
Yeah.
and the value that life could be more valuable if I gave more import to the moments. Yeah, you know, to make the best of the moments and realize that it may be passing, but God forbid I should walk out and get hit by a car. That may be my last moment when I was, you know, smiling at somebody or giving them a dirty look.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I guess it's better to smile than give dirty looks because you never know. So that was just sort of my thought. You know, more we talk a lot about living in the present, and there's a lot of books about it, but to look at it in that way, of the amount of import that the moment does have for myself and for building a more positive soul, I think is really something I needed to hear today.
I think we all need to hear it, and even just these stories. I mean, I'll follow up with an email with sources, and you could see more of the video and hear the person's encounter and story that they would share. But it has some beautiful power to just, you know, meditate on. Think in French we say réfléchir. Isabel, you have to help me with the English for that is contemplate, I guess, and really just use that as a perspective. I think it's like a paradigm shift. It's like every moment seeing it as an incredible place for opportunity and growth. Let's see. I'm just going through some videos here. Fred and Tessa, do you have any thoughts or points?
Yeah, Rabbi. I was thinking about, of course, I was thinking about what Barbara said, because she's my go-to when I need grounding and I need, just talking about positivity. Barbara Schwartz is a role model for me of always being in the positive, always looking at, her glass is always full.
Amazing.
And I know Barbara, probably when she was moving every year in that different part of her life, her glass was still full.
Wow.
So
Barbara, maybe after I'll email everyone your phone number so we could all have a talk with you directly. Thank you.
Fred and I, how long were in this house? 44 years in this house.
Wow.
And it's interesting. So the place is a constant, but the people in our lives come and go. There are many dear friends who are gone now, family who is gone. But then there are the new people we meet in our lives, and I don't want to say they fill the void. I mean, people are always missed, but they provide a new opportunity for a new adventure in your life.
Amazing.
You know, my mother, you know, I always talk about my mother to you, and she was so wise, and you cannot change the past. It is what it is. And mother always used to say, you don't want to know what the future brings. You just don't. And I guess she was living in the moment without even knowing it. And I love the moment because it's what there was that saying, it's the present, it's a gift.
Yeah.
And I love it because Fred and I, whether we're just sitting in the backyard and enjoying watching the plants grow or hearing a bird, it still gives us great joy.
It's amazing.
Whenever,
I love that. Thank you, Tessa.
You're welcome,
amazing.
Rabbi.
I love it whenever I visit some people that live high up on a mountain or live that have a beautiful view, and I ask them if they ever get bored of the view, and most of the time people are like, no, I appreciate it and I think about it every day. And it's not just a view of this, but a view of life, and look at every perspective and moment. It's really a work, I think, like Isabel was saying, and to have that perspective. But it's so doable, and almost like what the Rebbe said before, it's so important to have. It helped. It allowed the Rebbe to survive. I think that's a very powerful line, to look at it with a positive, not as a transient, but even the most out of the way, inconvenient time, really as that glass full, not only half full but full, and it's full of meaning that I can learn from. And that's a beautiful perspective. Barbara, I would love to hear you as well.
Thank you. I was just thinking that, or I guess it's more of a question. How do you balance your innate survival skills when you have a history of things not being safe and things being chaotic, and you kind of lose boundaries? For someone that doesn't necessarily have a traditional upbringing, whatever the heck that means, that's lived through some really serious traumas. Wow. I think there's a fear that comes up in me when I think about the idea of putting up all the tents. It's like, that's not always been a safe thing to do. And where do you find that boundary with, I am moving forward, I'm listening to God's will for me, and I don't have boundaries, and I've invited myself to be a doormat or stay in a situation that is no longer productive and healthy for me. Yeah,
I'll lean on some of the wise and experienced here. I would love to hear people's perspective, because Barbara, that's a very profound, very important question. I'm very strong. I like to say this, that a person should never be treated like a shmata. That's never healthy. I'm just going to go out and say, and I really want to hear what people say, because I want to learn from that as well. But I would say is having proper mentorship, because you need someone that has an outside view. That in Talmud there's a term, ein chavash mater atzmai, which means a person who's bound up, who's in shackles, they can't free themselves. They need someone from the outside to help them. And a lot of times when you're in I'm just going to talk about it in general. If a person is in, God forbid, a relationship or in an abusive mindset, a lot of times they don't realize it. And I'm looking on the call, and a lot of people have been mentors of others in these stories. And I think it's actually a very Jewish idea to have proper mentorship. To quote the Mishnah, it's aseh lecha rav, to have a teacher. And it's not really a person. I think every person should have a therapist that they could go to and speak their mind. I think that's healthy. But also just a friend, someone who you respect, someone who loves you, someone who cares for you. And just to quote a story from the Rebbe, someone asked the Rebbe once, "What's a Rebbe? Define a Rebbe." And the Rebbe said, "A Rebbe is a good friend." The guy's like, "Come on, Rebbe has to be a lot more than that." And he said, well, the Rebbe asked him, how do you look at a friend? He said, I have a bunch of friends. I go golfing with these friends, and I go out to dinner on Sundays with those friends, and I go to movies on Saturdays with those friends. And the Rebbe says, the way I see a friend is someone who you could share your deepest peckle, your darkest secrets and challenges with out loud, and they don't look at you any differently. On the contrary, they respect you even more once you've shared them. That's a friend. And I think really a person, maybe it's turning into a speech, I'm sorry, Barbara, a person really needs someone from outside to not schlep them, but to guide them, to hold their hand, and for them to realize they're not alone, and B, to give them that healthy balance, to know that they need to be present, but at the same time, not be treated like a shmata. Barbara, I would love to hear if you have any perspective on that, Barbara Schwartz, or anyone else, if they have any thoughts on it. But after what Tessa said, Barbara, I'm going to lean on you.
What I felt badly that I didn't say is that the reality you experience is much like a child, where if the child has X happen to them, they think the whole world has X happen to them. They think that's the way things are. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
And I think that helps you get through a lot of life's experience. You have to be able to hear a good friend. You have to listen.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, so it's not only having the friend, you have to be able to listen.
Yeah,
I
I
like
feel
that.
like I wasn't given great boundaries or guidance as a young person. And so I have my Bobby, who's 95. And so I might not have good boundaries for myself, but I would say, would my Bobby like it if she heard that I did this? Or would she, be proud that I made this decision? Or would she say, come on, Barb, you know better than that? And that sort of worked as a surrogate for me.
Wow.
Also, you could go by how you feel with whatever is going on. Does it make you feel good or bad about yourself? I think one of the things about relationships is that you want, at least I do, I want to look for things that make me feel like I'm being my best self, not my worst one. And then I'm feeling good about myself and not badly.
Wow. I'm very inspired. Well, thank you all. This will end our class for the evening with some perspective, realization that every moment is an opportunity to realize the importance of having a bias, because we all have a bias, and making it a positive one. And like Isabel was saying, making it as a work, as a meditation, something that you have to strive toward, and it's not something that's going to just snap your finger, but you have to make it a reality. I'll follow up with an email, God willing, in the next day with some pointers. And this was really special. A reminder, Adina has her Torah and Tea tomorrow. I think it's the last one of the series. For those that are joining our advanced Hebrew, Margie, I think you'll be there. That's tomorrow evening. We have an advanced Hebrew class to learn how to read in Hebrew. Friday, we have our L'chaim, and it's at 7 p.m. before Shabbos. Sunday, God willing, we're going to start a new series of introducing Jewish communities from interesting places across the world. And I wish you all a safe evening, a Laila Tov, a Shavua Tov, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Bye, Tessa.
Beautiful
Bye,
session.
Barbara.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Bye, Margie. Bye, Ava. It's nice to meet you. I think it's my first time meeting you in
Okay.
person or on Zoom. Bye, Doris. Bye, Isabel. Bye,
Good night.
Diane. Bye, Arba.
Good night.
Bye, Adrian.
Bye-bye.
And I don't know, Gypsy is Yorba Gypsy you also? Is that you on the second screen? Not sure. Okay. Yarba is, there you go, Gypsy. Is Gypsy you, Yarba?